Hey, my name is Jenna. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm gonna show you how to make this cute fall bookmark using some intro embroidery stitches. So if that sounds interesting, stick around. Obviously, there are a ton of uses for a bookmark, but I'm using mine in my Erin Condren planner. I know back in like 2015, Erin Condrens used to be such a thing on YouTube, opening them, seeing how people like planned their week, and I loved it, but I just use mine as like a normal planner. And I haven't gotten it for a few years, and I noticed when it came that it has this new bookmark. Instead of just like the measuring tape, it has all these stencils, which is great because you can stencil, but is a little bulky for a bookmark, which is what led me to making this cute little ghost. As far as supplies that you're gonna need, this one's pretty simple and pretty inexpensive. The first is just a ribbon. This is leftover ribbon from my wedding welcome bags. If you want to see more details on my wedding, there is a video I can link for that. You will also need some embroidery thread. So you'll need a white for the ghost body, and orangish for the pumpkin. This is just a leftover thread from a kit I got on Amazon, and it's like kind of more salmon, but it worked. And the darkest thread you have. So ideally it would have been black, but I'm using this dark brown from DMC. This is 3031. And if you're interested, the white is B5200. You will also need a needle. I'm doing 3 strands for the embroidery floss, so a needle that goes with 3 strands, and something to trace the design onto your ribbon. For this project, I tried these Madame So heat erasable pens. I wouldn't recommend them. The heat didn't get all the marking off the way I would like, but if you're interested for an inexpensive option on Amazon, I did get these on Amazon. I think the water-soluble markers would work better. I'm also tracing the design onto the ribbon using a stencil, so you can use a piece of paper or any sort of like thicker, translucent material. Here I happen to use vellum because I just had a piece, but a paper would work the same, or if you're good at freehanding, you don't need that. For the stitches we're gonna do, it's going to be a split back stitch, a satin stitch, and then sort of like a modified lazy daisy. If you are very familiar with these stitches, you can jump to later on in the video. The timestamp is around here. And if you want a refresher on those stitches, you just follow through with the video and I'll start with a refresher. Okay, so first you're gonna thread your needle. I have already divided this thread into 3 strands, so if you haven't done that yet, you wanna pause and do that. To thread the needle, I'm using a needle threader, so I'm just going to put the needle on the needle threader, pull the thread through, and then pull the needle down the needle threader over the thread, and it will be threaded onto my needle. To knot the needle, we're going to put the needle on the end of the thread, wrap the thread around the needle 3 times, hold on to the floss that's been wrapped around the needle, and then pull the needle through, and that will create a knot. A split backstitch is a backstitch where when you come back, you put your needle through the previous thread. So it's going to start the same way as a normal backstitch. You're going to do 1 stitch forward, move your needle up about 1 stitch length, come up through the fabric, and then when you come back to the prior thread to go do your backstitch, you're actually going to put it through the prior stitch, splitting that stitch. I chose this stitch for the majority of the bookmark because it allows us to do a nice, consistent outline stitch without adding the bulk of a stem stitch. It also will allow the bookmark to lay pretty flat in the book, so when the book is closed, there won't be the bulk of some of the other stitches. Here's a look at the back, and you're just going to continue down the line here, practicing the split back stitch. When you get to your final stitch, you're going to come up through the end, again go back through splitting the stitch, and then you can do a final one here. I thought the first one was a final one, but here it is. And to knot the stitch, we'll see when we flip it over. Here we go. The way I like to knot is to loop through the back of one of the stitches, so to go under that but not through the fabric, pull it through creating a little loop, and then pulling my needle through the loop to create a knot, and I usually double knot, so I'll just do that again. The satin stitch consists of a number of forward stitches lined up next to each other. So you're going to come up through the fabric, do one stitch length forward, and then start your second stitch right next to where you started your first stitch. So come up through the bottom again of this square, taking time to make sure you've lined it up nicely, and then through the stitch right next to the second stitch that you did here, or the second time you went through the fabric. So for the third stitch, you're going to come up right next to that second stitch, and then again through the top right next to where you came in on the fabric with the second stitch. Some of the tricks here are just making sure that your stitches are pretty straight and that there aren't gaps in between your stitches, or that you haven't layered them on top of each other, so that they have the space to have their own sort of spot in the fabric, but you're still creating the illusion of a solid kind of block of thread, and that's what it looks like on the back. Okay, so I'll be the first to admit that I did not nail the framing here, but here we go with the modified lazy daisy. So first I'm just showing you the normal lazy daisy, where you make a loop with the start and end of your kind of points next to each other, bring your thread up the middle. I pulled a little bit too tight here so it didn't become a great daisy petal, and then go back down to create a little sort of like anchor point for that loop. But what we're doing here is a smile for a pumpkin. So we're going to come up on the thread to do one half of the smile, like one end point on the smile. Come back through the thread where we want the other end point of the smile to be, and then come up as a midpoint where we want the bottom of the smile to be. So you'll see me coming up in the middle here, keeping that loop nice and slack compared to the first stitch I did there. Creates a little smile, and then I'm going to come back on the other side of the thread, creating a little loop or anchor point for that smile. So the first step to making this bookmark is to transfer the ghost onto your ribbon. So to do that, I just found this little cute ghost in Canva and traced him on vellum and then made a stencil. If you want more details on how to make these stencils, I have a video that I can link above here. I found the little ghost that I'm using on Canva, so if you have a Canva subscription, then you will be able to find him. Or, as you can see, he's pretty simple, and I think he would be pretty easy to freehand. Once you're ready to transfer the image onto your ribbon, whether that's through the stencil or through freehand, you're just going to measure out the ribbon. So to do that, I just measured it with the planner that I'm using, but obviously you can do it with a normal bookmark size, or measure it with whatever book that you're using. Then you're just going to trace or draw. So some tips here are just make sure that you have enough room on the ends to get his little hand and the little pumpkin onto the ribbon. As you can see, mine is slightly big, so I just make some adjustments with freehand. I did not do the face on the pumpkin, so you can just do little lines for that pumpkin, and I didn't do the stars in his eyes, so just little circles and his little smile. Now you're ready to start stitching, so you're going to start with a split back stitch with the white thread. You're going to come up, I started at the corner, I don't recommend that, maybe a little bit further in so the tail of your knot there doesn't stick out. As you can see, it kind of pops out on the side. But one thing to keep in mind when doing this is that we're just doing the outlines of each of these designs, so in order to have the illusion of depth, you're going to want to think about the order of doing the stitches. So first is the outline of the ghost, but leaving a spot for the pumpkin, so not going through the side with the pumpkin all the way, and then you're layering the pumpkin on top. In addition, I kept the hand free here and came back and did it later so that there was the outline of his body and then the outline of his arm, as opposed to it looking like a kind of like a bulge off of his body. You'll notice that I didn't use an embroidery hoop here I think that if you have a small one, there's no harm in using it, but I found it easier to just hold it with my fingers. As I come around the outline here, you'll notice that I leave his little pumpkin holding hand free. That's because I want his hand to be in the absolute foreground to look like it is holding that top handle of the pumpkin. So I'm saving that for after I do the handle. You'll see that as I get to the pumpkin, I just do a longer stitch going under the pumpkin to create the illusion that the pumpkin is in the foreground. So you'll just do the full outline of the ghost, ignoring that one hand, and we'll meet back once you have that done to move on to the pumpkin. Once you've done the outline of the ghost, you're ready to do your little pumpkin. So for the pumpkin, again, we're doing a split back stitch with the orange thread. You're going to come up and do the outline of the pumpkin, and then do the lines coming down from the pumpkin. Once you finished with the pumpkin outline, you're then going to move on to the handle. So this is going to be using your dark thread and again doing a split back stitch. You're going to make his little handle from the flat edge of the pumpkin in a little loop to the other flat edge. Once you're done with the handle, you're ready to move on to finishing out his outline. So first here I did the little lines on the bottom of his skirt, but this order doesn't necessarily matter. You could do the hand first. And then I move on to his little hand. His hand consists of a circle around the handle of the pumpkin, and then 2 little lines to connect his hand to, his little arm to his body. At that point, you're ready to move on to his eyes, which is where the satin stitch comes in. You're going to do 1 longer satin stitch in the middle of his little eyes, and then 2 smaller ones on either side to kind of give them an oval shape. Once you're done with his eyes, you're going to move on to his little smile. So you're going to bring the needle up on one corner of his smile, push it back through on the other corner, and then create a little anchor loop in the middle at the bottom of his smile. So you're going to come up where you want the bottom of his smile to be. Tighten your thread, but not too tight, to create a little loop there for his smile, and then bring the needle down on the other side of that loop and pull it through, and you'll create a little ghost smile. And that is it, your last stitch of this project. Since I used a heat transfer pen, one of my last touches was using some heat from this candle to dissolve the pen marks, and then I used a Bic lighter to melt the edges of both sides of the ribbon to keep it from fraying. So there you have it, that's how we make the bookmark. I attached mine to the back using washi tape and then just draped it forwards, but obviously that is an optional step. I hope you enjoy your cute little ghost. If you do, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.